Hi, I'm Pastor Steve Talmage of Love of Christ Lutheran Church in Mesa, Arizona. Each week, Pastor Nanette Christofferson and I like to provide a brief look at two of the assigned lectionary Bible readings for the upcoming Sunday. In this video, we're going to look at the Old Testament reading, which is assigned for Sunday, February 7th. It's Isaiah chapter 40, verses 21 to 31. Isaiah 40, verse 1 through Isaiah 55, verse 13, has been attributed to one who wrote under the prophet's name to those who have been living under exile in Babylon. This covered a period of 586 to 538 BCE. Chapter 40 begins with a familiar refrain. Comfort, O comfort my people, says the Lord, says your God. Most of us can only imagine what it might be like to go through a period of displacement or exile. Because some of us have worked with refugees who have made their way to our country after devastating or natural or human-made disasters, we may have heard stories of fleeing from a home because of a threat of violence. We may have heard stories of being threatened and feeling unsafe because they chose to worship differently than the ruling tribe or party of the land. Civil war or famine may have pushed them to leave their home for the hope of safety and daily bread. In this case, the people have been conquered. The southern kingdom had been spared earlier exile under the Assyrian Empire, which took the northern tribe out in exile. But due to poor and misplaced political leadership and a shift from putting their faith and confidence in God, the remaining tribes of Israel, the southern kingdom, could not withstand the military power of the stronger Babylonians. The best and the brightest were forced to move and be placed in resettlement camps with hopes of being strategically used within the Babylonian Empire. The sick, the lame, and the elderly were left behind to fend for themselves. We can again only imagine the sense of horror, loss, and remorse, but this chapter is an invitation for those living in exile to hear that their punishment for chasing after other gods, not trusting God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength, is over. The prophet has been sent, chapter 40, verses 3 through 5, to prepare the way in the wilderness as the glory of the Lord will be revealed. Verses 6 to 8 offers an exchange that contrasts the human life as grass that grows and fades away. But the word of our God, the word of our God will stand forever. Verses 9 to 11 issues a call for a sentinel to climb the highest mountain, to see for the people of Zion and Jerusalem. God is on God's way. God is coming with a mighty arm to deliver God's people, but that mighty arm will also be the embracing arm of a gentle shepherd. In the year 539 BCE, after uniting the Persian and Median kingdoms under his rule, King Cyrus subdued the Babylonian Empire. In 538 BCE, King Cyrus made a public declaration, an edict, granting the Jews the right to return to Judah and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. For the people in exile, God's deliverance was seen through the overthrow of Babylon by Cyrus, who in turn offered those who chose to an opportunity to return to their homeland. Verses 12 through 31 are a series of questions being asked with a clear answer in mind. Who or what can be compared to the God we confess to be the creator of all things? Note that this whole chapter is written in lyrical form as a song to be heard and remembered by the people who've been living in despair and doubt. A question: how have songs raised your spirits and allowed you a sense of being part of something bigger than yourself? Or why is it humans want to be able to place limits on the vastness of who God is? We come to our reading assigned for this Sunday. It deals with God's eternal nature and versus human mortality in verses 21 to 24. In 22, we are compared to grasshoppers on the earth from God's vantage point of the universe. Princes and rulers of the earth are nothing compared to God in verse 23. And in verse 24, all we must do is look at the cycles of nature and see the temporal nature of leaders and life. Prior to last November's presidential election, a long-standing friend and I were having a conversation. At one point in the conversation, the friend asked me a question, expecting me to agree with him. You do believe this is the most important presidential election to ever take place in U.S. history? I answered, absolutely not. This nation has gone through over 250 years of changing presidential leadership. There have been other moments as critical, if not more than today. Whoever gets elected, whether that's the person that you voted for or you voted against, by God's grace, in 4 years, you get another chance to make a change. Leaders come and go. Though it does matter who is entrusted with the authority and power and influence to lead, no human leader will outlast God, good or bad. Verses 27 to 31 of our reading is under the theme, Our God does not faint or grow weary. The song of Isaiah continues to lift the spirits of despairing people by reminding them of who God is contrasted with who we are. God is, has been, and will always be. God is everlasting, and as the prophet records, God does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. Some of the ancient mythologies project human characteristics onto the gods and goddesses, which on occasion portrayed humans needing to make loud noises or create events to awaken the gods and goddesses to get their assistance or their attention. So I ask, what does it mean for you to put your trust in one who is, who has been, who will always be, while also knowing this one we trust never faints or grows weary? Verse 29, he gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Verse 30, even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. And verse 31, but those who wait for the Lord, those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. At times, it is important for us to stop and reflect on the migration of people. From our ancient ancestors somewhere on the continent of Africa, to parts around this globe, to early Native Americans who crossed the Bering Strait into what would become North America and further down South America, to the Native Americans physically forced to march off their tribal lands, to some of our ancestors who homestead the prairie land of the U.S., to refugees and asylum seekers around the globe. People have constantly been on the move. War, persecution, famine, disease, and a chance for a better life pushed and motivated people to uproot and go. And they're still doing it. For people of faith, the journey has never been simple or easy. Our spiritual ancestors, the Israelites, were known for being a nomadic people and in later centuries forced to move or flee due to anti-Semitic ideologies. Those brought here in bondage under slavery were forced to endure horrific conditions. Today, listen to many of their ancestors cry out for justice in America. And when we are privileged to engage in conversation with our African American relatives or neighbors, we often hear the repeated refrain, "We are exhausted." Exhausted for the 400-year journey to the continued struggle for equal rights and equal justice. For those of us wearing masks, limiting social engagement, and waiting for a vaccine, we too are tired of waiting and wondering. We know COVID-19 exhaustion and appreciate the intensity of that exhaustion for those working the front lines of healthcare, teaching our children, or forced to be locked down in a senior care facility. This song of Isaiah spoke mightily to people exhausted, despairing, wondering, and tempted to just give up on God. But this passage calls us, called them and called us to remember who God is. And remember whose we are. To remember our God does not faint or grow weary. And this God's strength will carry us through. Have a blessed week. Have a blessed Sunday when we hear these words proclaimed on February 7th. God bless you.